So I have to have an identity rooted in unique self, rooted in Eros, rooted in the field of value, right? Rooted in, and that's why the word independence in the original Hebrew, right? The word independent is atzmaut, and atzmaut means, atzmiut means inner full essence. A wild and poignant and gorgeous moment filled with its agonies and its ecstasies, its beauties and its poignancy, its potency, its passion, its presence. So let me just first presence where I am, and I want to just welcome everyone. We're here in One Mountain. We're in this moment poised between utopia and dystopia. Several thousand of us have gathered in this particular community, this One Mountain community, where our commitment is no less than to evolve the source code of consciousness and culture, which is the evolution of love, to articulate a politics of Eros and a politics of love in response to the meta crisis, in response to potential dystopias. We invoke the most stunning, good, true, beautiful world that our hearts and our bodies and our minds have always known is possible, and fragments and flickers of visions of it live in the interior sciences and the great traditions. But tragically, those flickering visions were so often hijacked by their ethnocentric contexts. And now we're at a moment where they need to be reclaimed. Now we're at a moment in which, as Joseph Tainter pointed out, every civilization has fallen, and yet we haven't solved the fundamental challenges that caused every civilization to fall. We now have a global civilization. It's a global civilization with exponential technologies, and exponential technologies of weaponized destruction available to rogue non-state actors, and a list of 15 significant existential risks. And thank you so much, KK, for the tea. Deeply and wildly appreciated. Thank you, KK. Thank you so much. And we don't have a vision of the possible future. We can't actually respond to dystopia without a vision of utopia. We can't respond to the meta crisis without a vision of what would it look like. And at the Center for Integral Wisdom, together with my dear beloved friend Ken Wilber, and with Zach Stein, and with our co-chair for many years, Barbara Marx Hubbard, and John Mackey, and our incoming chair, whose house I'm in right now, Aubrey Marcus, right down in Austin. We've been trying to articulate this new vision, to articulate this new possibility, right? To feel into what could be, and to articulate an evolution of the source code itself. Now, let me just share with you, just because, we never skip the personal as we go to the great evolution of the source code. So my dear friend that I'm down here with actually just lost his dad a few hours ago, completely suddenly. So we were in the middle of a kind of the normal intensities of life, and his dad literally just passed away. And so we've just been in that here the last few hours. Literally, we were sitting right before, I stepped on the broadcast. I didn't even realize what time it was, right? Just deep in this space. And so I'm just kind of holding that, and holding life and death, and sudden death, and the death of the father. And part of what we need to invoke today is what I would call the blessing of the father. And the blessing of the father is not just the personal father, although we all have the story with the personal father. The blessing, we all yearn desperately for the blessing of the father. And so I want to invoke that blessing of the Father, but I want to invoke it in a kind of larger way, because the Father is both the Father that I was born to, my biological father, but it's also the Father in culture. And we used to talk about the Father as our Father in heaven. So that was the Father who was dissociated from the world, who was alienated from the world, who wasn't invested in the world, but had created it outside of himself, demanding in some sense its obedience. And we know that that's actually a distortion of the Father. That's a corruption of the Father. The Father actually is invested in, is part of, even as he holds. And we're used to talking about the mother, but we're not quite used to talking about the Father. But our system of governance, stay close, friends, our system of governance is the Father. It's the vessel that holds us. That's the Father, right? And so when we have a broken relationship with the Father, then there's no place for the mother to emerge. We can do all of the mother ritual we want. And many people on this call know that I'm madly devoted to she, to the mother, right? To Ma. But actually the mother doesn't have a place without the Father. It's Eros Gamos. And our system of governance, which is the Father and culture, is broken. And so we need to actually reclaim the Father. We need to resurrect the Father. And so I've invited today, and we're going to do 1 or 2 steps before he starts talking, but he's going to give an incredibly important talk. I've invited a very, very, very dear friend of mine and of Barbara's. And actually, we have our relationship, and Christopher Life had his relationship with Barbara, and then the three of us, right, got to begin the fragrance of the articulation of a vision. And Christopher was actually a key architectural visionary player in manifesting this iteration of One Mountain, right? So he's actually very close, right? A lot of the technologies that we created, that when we created the space of One Mountain, was together with Christopher. And Christopher is really, we've known each other. He's both a little brother and a dear friend, right? And an evolutionary partner. And he's dedicating his life to the blessing of the Father, both personally as a father, right? And collectively, right? We're working with this broken system of governance, which governance is dominated by a win-lose polarized metrics. In the United States, 2 major parties, in which democracy exactly doesn't accomplish what it's supposed to. It becomes an aggressive win-lose metrics in which there's no synergy. We don't have a vision of what a synergistic democracy would look like. It's always one half organizes, wins, the other half loses. So we have half of a country alienated, right? In this tragic win-lose metrics, broken structure, devoid of intimacy and devoid of Eros, which is an expression of the broader global intimacy disorder. And so Christopher's actually invoking a convention. I'm actually here in Austin to do a whole series of podcasts with my dear friend Aubrey Marcus, and at Christopher's invitation to give a keynote at his convention, his invoking, his convening, together with his partners here in Austin, to actually begin to articulate a new space in culture. What would it like to move beyond that binary win-lose metrics and see a third way and see a new way and resurrect the Father? So this is a day of the Father, and there's no coincidences in the intimate universe. The death of a father, the surprise, right? The shock, the beauty, the poignancy, the pain, the potency, the presence, it's all one. So what's going to happen today is I was actually going to do a dialogue with Christopher. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. Christopher's going to do the major talk this morning. He's going to talk to us about the vision of a new independent party and what it means to him and why it's important. He's going to also invite anyone who can actually come down, right, in a week to actually be present with us, either on live stream or in person. I'm going to do just 2 things here. We're just going to play 2 videos. We're going to invoke the blessing of the Father. The second one's going to be Barbara, right, announcing her run for vice president, speaking, right, at the convention in 1984, where Geraldine Ferrara was the nominee, right? Her talk, number 1, But first, I just want to invoke the blessing of the Father. So Krista's going to pull up a video. And it's a video called Fall on Me. And it's a father talking to a son. Because we want to invoke the energy here of the blessing of the Father. And Christopher, I didn't know the Father was going to be so deeply in the space till a couple hours ago. And so the Father's in the space. So I'm going to invoke the blessing of the Father. We're going to then turn to Barbara. And then Christopher's going to give a talk. And we're going to share this talk. We're going to share this piece with everyone we can. But particularly, Barbara whispered in my ear in the night. She said, please share this with my people. Share this with my people. This needs to be shared with my people. So we're going to share this not once, not twice, 3 times this week. We're going to make sure that this people can feel that this is happening and can join this. And just to say maybe the last thing, and Christopher, I'm going to pull age rank on you now. So just giving you, my dear evolutionary brother, but also giving you the blessing of the Father. I'm so insanely proud of you. I'm so insanely proud of who you are and what you're doing, right? And your courage and your commitment and your depth and your integrity. And I couldn't be more delighted and more honored and more thrilled. Blessing of the Father, right? To be with you here, right? Young man. And at other times you get to be the Father. But for now, in this moment, right? Like mad blessings of the Father. Mad blessings of the Father. Yeah. So we're going to invoke a silence of presence for a second. Everyone, welcome, 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 welcome. And we're going to just play. We're going to feel the blessing of the Father. So take us inside, Krista, as soon as we can. Here we go. Do we understand that? Can we feel that? That's the blessing of the Father. That's what the convention next week's about. It's about reweaving that blessing of the Father in culture, this new vision of governance. And we've been talking about a politics of Eros and a politics of love. Barbara began a piece of this conversation. We're picking up one key piece. Christopher's picking up one key piece. Brothers and sisters, right, for the Father. So let's now hear Barbara, and we're going to go to Christopher. So Barbara Marx Hubbard, Barbara, my beloved evolutionary homemade. Here we go. This is our dream together, all of us.
We have arrived at a choice point of human history. On the largest possible scale, we see that on one hand, we could go down quickly on a devolutionary cycle of destruction. On the other hand, those of us who know evolution realize that this crisis is giving birth to something new and greater and more synergistic than has ever come before. But where is it and what is it? In my opinion, OneNation is stepping into the evolutionary choice point between devolution and more conscious evolution with exactly the framework and the attitude toward which we could build a synergistic democracy. A synergistic democracy would be one in which we match needs and resources and look for common goals to achieve a greater result than anybody could ever achieve by the win-lose method. So since evolution is shifting from win-lose to either all lose or a new evolutionary cycle, I declare from my deep understanding, the fact I was nominated for Vice President of the United States in 1984, proposing the Office for the Future, that I have found in OneNation the national template of what the United States of America is for. It's the direction of our evolution. It's the reason for this greatness of our nation. And right now we're caught in a dilemma of win-lose that is benefiting no one at all. So finally, I will give every ounce of my energy, of my intelligence, of the people that I know everywhere in this country to support OneNation achieving its goal that by the year 2021, in January, I would like to be at the inauguration of OneNation, offering to the United States a way forward in a new presidency equal to our full potential. Thank you.
Tears in my eyes. I love you, Matt, brother. Take it away.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for being here together today. I love that this church allows people to come together and worship. And I've really enjoyed being part of this community for years now. Not active for a little bit though. And thanks to all the openings, the prayers and the remarks, they just kind of remind us of the kind of spiritual reality of the moment of evolution that we're all here a part of and participating in. I'm really moved by the remarks of Mark and the mentioning of the loss of the father of one of his key people, and that video also is just really powerful as I reflect upon both being the son of a father and also being the father of a son, and just that sacred, beautiful lineage and relationship. Barbara was a dear friend of mine, and we met and came into relationship late in her life. And her passing was a real shock to so many of us, and myself included, because it was feeling like we were just activating a real synergistic roadmap together. And her age didn't even cross my mind, because when I interacted with her, she just felt like she had the energy of a 25-year-old. So I just imagined we were going to be at it for decades together. And so I'm the founder of the party OneNation, and that's what she was speaking into in that endorsement. And OneNation was a new political party that I've organized, and the purpose of organizing that party was to create a political vehicle to help folks that are in this conversation, that know that we are in a meta crisis, but to use Barbara's terminology, our crisis is a birth, right? There's a crisis here. There's an ambulance running down the road with the sirens on, but it's not a heart attack. It's a birth. There's something coming in this urgent moment of crisis. And so OneNation Party was designed to help people who really are oriented around systemic transformation and moving towards holism and synergy and integrating diverse perspectives to create new and novel insights and new and novel solutions, to be able to become the mayors and the state representatives and the governors and the national congressional representatives and the presidents of the future. And so I was really excited and grateful to be working with Barbara on that project, and to receive such an explicit endorsement was very humbling for me. And right when we were gearing up to really put a lot of things in motion, we lost her in this world. And the only way that I could really make sense of all of that was that she was moving on beyond into the spirit realm to kind of bring that allyship and that partnership, in a broader, even more profound way than she'd be able to do in the flesh, because I don't think she would have left, if there wasn't a greater positioning for her synergy in this moment in time, because she's so for this moment in time, And so I feel that, and I bet many of you probably feel that too, that Barbara's with us actually, and not just as kind of like a trite statement so that we kind of feel better or something, but because it's really palpable. Mark mentioned that Barbara even gave him some marching orders last night, and I really believe and feel she has such a powerful spirit that she's really truly with us, and she is guiding us, and she is supporting us, and she's helping to create the context for all the synergy, all the miracles, all the synchronicities, all the opportunities. What a blessing. And as I presented OneNation to our country and kind of put a couple years into the developing of this party platform, I had a very particular insight that helped me to evolve the brand and evolve the theory of change. And that was that as an emerging new party, that was clear that we were moving beyond the two-party control of this country. I was inadvertently in competition with dozens of other emerging small parties who had a very similar ethos to be able to move beyond the dominant hegemonic control of the two-party system in this country. And even running candidates that were then in competition with each other, competing against independent dollars and independent votes, which only reinforces the election outcomes of the existing two parties. And once I really got that, I realized that I was no longer aligned with that. That theory of change had brought me to a particular intersection, kind of junction point of the Dharma. And then that produced a set of insights that allowed the next iteration to kind of unfold. And what I realized was that the world doesn't need another new party. What the world needs is a coordination system for all independent parties, a coordination system for the hundreds of organizations that are working on democracy reform initiatives, a space for the millions of Americans that will never join a party to still be able to plug into a political vehicle and a context for collective action. And so I founded an organization called the Independent National Union. And that's the union as a political concept, not like a labor union, but actually a union of political actors that don't give up their brands, don't give up their agencies, don't give up their audiences, don't give up their own particular ideological orientations. But to create a context where they could all actually start to work together with a higher level of coordination, and kind of like a board of tourism that represents, 50 different restaurants in a city and puts up a billboard that says, come to our city, and they come to the city, and then they, now there's more visitors to the city to be patrons to the restaurants. We need something like a board of tourism for the independent sector itself to be able to kind of concentrate resources to quote unquote, put up that billboard, if you will, and to be able to build a stronger narrative of what this moment in time really holds for us, what it means to be independent. Because independent isn't just a political identification or even just a voter registration status. To be independent is a very profound cultural concept. To be independent means that we have gone on the journey of actually separating from the inertia of the status quo that impressed itself upon us, that told us, what to think and what to buy and who to vote for and what to watch and what to, say. But instead, so many of us, and I'm sure every single person on this call, has gone through multiple stages of declaring your own independence from the inertia of the status quo that tried to tell you what to think, what to speak, and how to act. And so independence at the core is really the cultural and behavioral ability to think, speak, and act for oneself. And interestingly enough, this is not a selfish pursuit or a self-centered pursuit or a pursuit that silos individuals just think about themselves. No, it's when you have arrived at the ability to think for yourself that you're no longer manipulatable, that you're no longer controlled, that you're no longer tied into ulterior motives. And from that vantage point, you now have the ability to be able to represent the entirety of your community, not just the blues or not just the reds, but the whole of your community. So independence actually enables a certain quality and capacity of authentic, responsible, mature stewardship. And independence, ironically and counterintuitively, actually enables and begets unity, because from that vantage point, you can represent the needs of different constituencies, excuse me, and better help to be able to stitch together those needs and help to be able to depolarize communities as opposed to increase the hyperpolarization. And so independence is that deeper conversation of a practice of being an independent individual that then has the ability from that vantage point to carefully consider the well-being and the betterment and the improvement of quality of life of all they represent. Now, the profundity of the concept of independence goes even further, because at this junction point right now, at this phase change in the evolutionary trajectory, the phase change of human civilization, the phase change of the ecological and geological systems that are changed on this planet, that what's happening is people are just declaring independence like crazy. They're declaring independence, as I said, from the systems that they're no longer aligned with. So they're creating new media solutions. They're declaring independence from Fox and CNN. They're creating new technology solutions like blockchain to be able to actually create new contexts of technology. We're pulling space exploration and space commerce out of the control of national governments and claiming independence. So individual corporations have access to rockets and satellites and space travel and all those other aspects. And the list goes on and on and on. So there's actually this larger movement that's saying we're actually not waiting for permission, and we're not aligned with that system, and we're going to declare our future, and we're going to set our own trajectory, and we are in our own self-determination to actually kind of direct where we go from here, right? And so when we bring it back to this kind of story of the colonies, the American colonies coming together to declare independence from the systems they were no longer in resonant with. They were no longer aligned with taxation without representation. They were no longer aligned with being controlled by a country on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, right? They wanted their own self-determination. They wanted their own self-governance, and they wanted to determine how they were going to govern themselves. And so these colonies bound together, they came together to do something together that they could not do on their own. They came together to be more effective in their own declaration of independence. And unfortunately, because of the time, there was violence that was involved. So they came together to marshal the resources and the manpower and the capacities to be able to run a revolutionary war, right? And actually be able to assert their independence fully. And then from that independence, they were then able to write their own constitution and institute their own national government, right? And imperfect as it was a beautiful prayer, right? The prayer was the prayer of governance of, by, and for the people, right? The ideal that governance of, by, and for the people could support the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness for all, right? So that's a very profound prayer. That's a very beautiful prayer. And our country has failed in pretty much every imaginable way of fulfilling that ideal. But because we've set that trajectory as our ideal, every failure isn't for naught. Every failure is learning, right? It's a scientific experiment to say, how do we do governance of, by, and for the people that supports life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all? And so now we have a moment in time to declare independence, even from this last 250-year cycle of a national experiment, so that we can inventory all the lessons learned, and from that, integrate that into directing the future from here. And so, you know, kind of the punchline of all of this is, I believe that this trend for individuals to declare independence, right? Gallup polls say 20 years ago, 25% of Americans were independent, then 30%, then 35%. In the last couple of years, 40%, 45%. Last year, 50% of Americans identify as independent. What's actually happening here is, in a distributed fashion, individuals are kind of intuitively participating in this collective process of declaring independence again. But this time, it's not against King George III's Great Britain. It's about the two-party system and the entire gestalt of systems tied to that system that have extractive, manipulative, abusive implications around every corner that we look. And so we have this movement, a real movement, not just like, hey, let's have a movement. No, there's a real movement. 100 million Americans are saying, I'm independent. So we now have the opportunity to be able to crystallize and ground and solidify what these 100 million Americans are actually moving towards, what they're standing for, what are the narratives and the stories that are most effective at helping to be able to galvanize that potential into an actual, effective, formidable political alternative. And so as the founder of the Independent National Union, the first act of our organization is to run the first independent national convention. And so it juxtaposes the Republican National Convention, the Democratic National Convention, and we're saying this is a space to support the unification of the currently and hitherto fragmented and siloed independent sector into something more like a united independent movement, to be able to identify our common ground, to be able to stitch together roadmaps and joint action, so we can actually work together effectively to ensure that we have the systems and processes in place to be able to make sure that we have independent election outcomes happening in mass, that city council people and mayors and county commissioners and state reps and governors are all starting to be moving into the independent sector, whether it's that existing elected officials are, like Senator Kirsten Sinema, are declaring their independence from their previous party affiliation while in office, which we're going to start seeing more and more of, and or we're electing people into office that got there through an independent platform. And then we're also able to really rev up the democracy reform activities that upgrade the technology and the standards and the protocols of government, so that government itself evolves into becoming something extremely transparent, extremely accountable, really baked into the participatory engagement from the communities in the sense-making process and the joint action process, so that government can achieve its ideal of being a system of collective coordination that effectively and efficiently improves quality of life for everyone who touches it. And that's where we go from here. That's what the synergistic democracy is that Barbara's been prophesying of for decades, is that government becomes a vehicle for the thriving of all in its full evolution from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And so if any of that I shared is inspiring or interesting to you, then it may be inspired and interesting for you to mobilize and join us at this upcoming convention. It's April 3rd through 5th. It's right around the corner. It's in Austin, Texas, at this beautiful venue called the Palmer Event Center. And it's a convergence of hundreds of leaders from organizations that represent social movements, that represent all different types of brands and companies and political bodies that are coming together to discuss the topics of assembling a united independent movement. And we have 45 different focused panel conversations on all these different topics, so we can stitch this movement together more effectively and set a really powerful trajectory of where we go from here. And I believe that if we focus on building this national event platform and building this national narrative and building local organizing systems for this united independent movement, and we do this consistently and effectively over the next several years, we're going to see a fundamental center of gravity shift from the two-party system being kind of synonymous with American government to that system collapsing, imploding, corroding, losing power, losing influence, losing control, and this rising independent sector of our country actually becoming the prevailing presence of leadership and stewardship in our country, and with that energy, that ethos, and that culture further spreading around the world. So thank you very much for giving me a moment in time to share some of those thoughts and to make that direct invitation. And I'll share a link to this event in the chat right now. So if anyone wants to learn more or I see it's actually already right there. You've got a link right there. And maybe we'll share it just a couple more times, and everyone's invited. Thank you, Mark, for your time. I'm sure you probably got a couple of responses or comments to that.
Beautiful, beautiful. For Christopher, it's a fantastic. Most important response, gorgeous and beautiful, right? That's the, and just, I think everybody could feel both Christopher, right? Could feel the vision, could feel Barbara, right? And I wasn't, we were like deep in the middle here of this moment of life and death. And I actually literally stepped out of it because it was equally important to actually be here in this moment. And I couldn't not be here. It's so wildly important. I want to just share a couple of things about what Christopher said. And, my text is kind of blown up with people asking me questions. And so let me just kind of see if I can frame this a little bit, because it's so important. One, we talk about a lot what we call one world and ultimately one galaxy. So a whole bunch of people texted me, okay, so why are we talking one nation? Right? Are we kind of going back? No, we're not. And it's the way we get, that's a great question. I really appreciate the question. The way we get to one world is we first reconstitute the one nations, right? Meaning every individual country has to evolve its source code so that then they are units of coherence and intimacy and eros and integrity that can then become part of one world. There's no bypass road. You have to first do one nation before you do one world, and you have to first do one world before you do one galaxy, right? Right, tracks, that's one, that's critical. Two is, and I think a couple of people caught this in the chat box, Christopher's made a very, very deep shift in his sacred strategy, which is a mark of maturity. And as a leader who, it's a mark of maturity and depth and wisdom, right? A leader who's able to make that kind of shift. And he began running One Nation, right, as a political party. I think there may be a place for One Nation to come back in the future. I, for one, right, think it's still important. It has value, but this in-between step is unbelievably important, which is let's become this coordinating function. And you become a coordinating function by actually creating the space, the ground of being in which becoming can happen. And that's a visionary move. So I'm going to create the ground. I'm going to be the space in which emergence can happen. That's a shockingly beautiful and stunning and utterly necessary move, which requires kind of a bracketing of self for this larger self to emerge. So that's number two, and that's a wildly important. I think it's a sacred strategic movement, which is brilliant in the sense that it's filled with radiance. It's filled with light. Three, okay, and we're just getting up to four, that's it. Three, but there might be a 3A, but three. So three is this notion of being independent is unbelievably important. And you remember, and we may talk about it next week. Remember, we talked about polarity and the causes of polarization in a major talk we gave that my friend Daniel is sharing around, and all sorts of people. It's been a major topic of ours. So let's just talk about this notion that Christopher spoke about so beautifully, this notion of independence. So what independence means is, now stay really close, friends. Okay, I want to just kind of say this deeply, and I'm going to try and give you a different image, which will bring us back. So take the notion of a secret, okay? When someone says, I'm going to tell you a secret, and then you say, yeah, totally, I'll totally keep the secret. What most people mean when they say they're going to keep a secret is they'll only tell two other people. That's generally what it means, right? Keep a secret, I'm going to tell two people. Now, in all the lineage traditions, there was what was called the Balei Hasod, those who could keep the secret. So why was that a requirement of an initiation into a great interior science, was this capacity to keep the secret? And the answer is very subtle. It's very beautiful, because you can only keep the secret if you can give up the hit of egoic attention energy that you get when you share the secret. There's this moment when you go share the secret where everyone's like, tell me that. And you get that moment of attention, and we feel sometimes so empty inside that actually we betray a confidence, because in that moment of pseudo eros, I get that hit of attention energy, I'm alive for a second. So you become an initiate into a great tradition when you actually don't need that hit of superficial attention energy, because you're so deeply grounded in your own independence, meaning in your own interior sense of identity and self. You have a sense of who you are. Now stay close, friends. So what that means is, to be independent, I can't conflate my inner integrity, my beingness, right? My inner quality of self with a particular political position. What people do today is, the reason we have polarization is we've conflated identity with political position. My identity is, I'm a Democrat. My identity is in Germany and Holland. And I know there's half of the people here are not American. So apply this whether you're in China or whether you're in Holland or whether you're in Belgium, whether you're in Great Britain, whether you're in Australia, whether you're in Kenya. I know there's a couple of people in Nairobi with us today, or wherever you are. When you identify with a political position as a way of having an identity, you can never give up that position because that's your identity. And who gives up their identity? So I have to have an identity rooted in unique self, rooted in Eros, rooted in the field of value, right? Rooted in, and that's why the word independent in the original Hebrew is very, very beautiful. It's a gift to Brother Christopher. Right? The word independent is atzmaut, and atzmaut means, atzmiut means inner full essence. It's only when I have inner full essence that I can be independent. Because then my independence emerges from my Eros. When I don't have inner full essence, I cover up the emptiness with pseudo forms of political identity, which generally, right, virtually no one espousing those positions has actually read position papers on both sides, has actually investigated deeply. They've, in a kind of knee-jerk way, identified with a position in order to have that position be a pseudo-eros of identity, which is why Christopher and I came together in the beginning. It's why Barbara was so interested. It's why the three of us were interested, because actually you can't have independence without a new story of value. We call it here, as everyone knows, a new story of value rooted in first principles and first values. We desperately need to say, I love you as I need you. So I'm going to finish with this and thank Christopher. And we're going to send this out a bunch of times this week, but I want to say, I love you, I need you. And I love you, I need you means is we need Christopher to be doing this work. We need this to be happening. He needs us. We love each other. We love each other. We need each other. We're holding hands. We're standing in, and we're making this revolution together.